This video will be part one of a two-part video series on a production of staves for segmented wood turning, using the bandsaw to cut the angled sides of the staves. In this first video, I'll be describing the techniques that I developed to accurately and reproducibly cut the staves on the bandsaw using the Accu-Slice system, and then glue 18 of these staves together in a ring to produce a segmented stave bowl. In part two of the video series, I'll be demonstrating some additional techniques to more accurately cut the staves and additional techniques to quickly and accurately glue the staves together to produce some larger stave projects. Hello, I'm John Manier from Accu-Slice. For years, people have asked me how to make staves for segmented wood turning using the Accu-Slice system. And the thinking about the issue I was not able to resolve, and I kept telling customers, no, it can't be done with the Accu-Slice system. However, last week I got a phone call from Peter Wojciesko. And what Peter wanted to do, he wanted to take a rectangular board like this, and he wanted to cut at an angle. And I thought that was definitely doable on the bandsaw, but what he wanted to do with this was make staves for projects. Now I had assumed that you always had to get equal angles on the boards when you're making the staves for the segmented wood turning. But with this technique, you get two boards. So what you end up with, you start off with a board such as this. You slice it at the angle, and then when you put it together, there's your triangle with the equal and opposite angles. But you're doing it by just making one cut, not two cuts. So I thought this was a great idea for making staves for segmented wood turning. However, there's a problem, or actually there's three problems that arise in making this. Number one, when you're cutting these two boards, you want these two to be exactly the same. In other words, you want these two tops to be exactly the same width, and you want the bottoms to be the same width, and you want those to be end to end, always consistent. So that was one issue that had to be addressed. The second issue is how to mount it on the Accu-Slice system. You don't want to use glue because that's a permanent system, and you have to cut it off to get an accurate piece, and that'd be very time consuming. Second, you don't want to use double-sided tape because again that's time consuming, taking it off and on, and you may break the piece taking it off and on. But you want a system that's going to be quick and easy to mount it on the system and take it off, because you want to make a lot of these. Make a single segmented bowl, you might want to make 18 boards just for one project, so you can't use glue or double-sided tape. It would just take too long. So that was the second issue. The third issue is how to get accurate angles on the bandsaw. Typically on a bandsaw you might get an error of maybe plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees when getting an angle on a bandsaw. But with segmented wood turning you need an accuracy of better than 1/10 of a degree accuracy. So that's one issue. How do you address that to get accurate angles in the bandsaw? So we pursued this problem thanks to the input from Peter. I do want to thank him for his idea. Again, any time customers give us ideas, gets me thinking about what can be done with the Accu-Slice system and what can be done new. So with Peter's idea, I came up with this to take it further and to make these staves for segmented wood turning. So in this video, we'll be describing how I was able to do this, how I was able to solve all these issues to make accurate staves for segmented wood turning. Now the issue is, with our normal Accu-Wedge, I can cut wedges very nicely and very accurately. But to cut long pieces, I can't do that with the Accu-Wedge system. So the only way to do it is to tilt the bandsaw table. So that's what I did in this case. I used a protractor, digital protractor, and I wanted to make 18 segmented staves. So I set my blade angle between my bandsaw table and my blade to 70.0 degrees. And I put a board on my system. And this is a board, the jig I made to do this. It consists of my Accu-Slice carriage, in this case my 18-inch Accu-Slice 2 carriage. And I made a sacrificial fence, and I put a cleat on the bottom. This cleat's about 1/8 of an inch wide at the top, and then it tapers down to nothing on the bottom. And then I use some of these screw inserts and my offset clamps that I can put a board on here and clamp it in position. So I can put a board on here and then clamp it in place. And that makes for a quick adding and removing the board from the sacrificial fence. So I'm not using glue or double-sided tape, just a clamping system that clamps the board in place. Then I can put this on my rail on my Accu-Slice system. And I tilt my bandsaw table to 70.0 degrees, and I made some cuts. And I took my board, and a board such as this, which I cut it up into pieces. So I cut my first pieces and into some small pieces. I assembled into a ring to make a segmented wedge. And the angle was off a little bit. You see there's some gaps in here. So I went back and I changed my blade angle to 70.1 degrees. Again, it takes a little finesse to try and get that tweaked in, but using my digital protractor, I was able to do that, get exactly 70.1 degrees. So when I did that, I got my angle of 70.1 degrees. And I made another segmented disc, again, from those pieces, and this is the result. And it's near perfect. It's pretty close. So this should work pretty well. It's off a hair, maybe less than 1/10 of a degree. So I might try and just tweak this a little bit more, maybe try and get like 71.5 degrees, and then see how accurate I can get it. So let me go ahead and do that. And so what I'm going to do here is remove my carriage. Loosen my table, the hair. The other one is a little bit loose. See if I can just tap it to tweak it in. And there I got 71.5 degrees. So I'm going to put my carriage back on. Now, ideally what I should have done is measure the angle between the bandsaw table and my flat plate of my sacrificial fence. But this plate's in the way, so it's impossible to get that at angle. That's why I had to measure it the other way. Because ideally, the angle between the bandsaw table and this flat plate on my sacrificial fence should be exactly 70.0 degrees to give me a 20-degree angle on my wedges. Because these wedges, in order to make an 18 segmented disc, need to be exactly 20.0 degree angle between the wedges. Okay, next what I want to do is I want to get accurate cutting of this. In other words, I want my board angle to look, something like this when I cut it. An angle very similar to that. So I want to set my bandsaw table to be cut accurate in the middle of this board. So I put some marks on here and I measured this board very accurately to get in the exact center of the board, and I want my bandsaw blade to go right through the center of that cut. That'll give me hopefully equal size pieces of wood. Now before we even started, I have 3 of these boards, and I ran these through my board sander to get exactly straight and parallel sides on all 3 boards, the exact same width, the exact same thickness. I want them all to be exactly the same. Because if they're different thicknesses, I could throw off my wedges. So they all need to be exactly the same. So I'll take my first piece and I'll mount it on my carriage. And let's align the bandsaw blade to cut right through the center. Now let me move the camera so you can see that. So it may be a little hard to see that, but that blade is going right through the center of that X and Y position on the edge of my board. So that should give me two boards exactly the same width and thickness on all sides. I said my angle is set to the correct angle. So I'm lowering my blade guides a little bit just to get them as low as possible, just so it clears everything. The lower I get those blade guides, the safer it is to keep that blade exposed from any possible finger contact. And also the lower they are, the more accurate it's going to be on the blade, keeping it straighter. Okay, that should be all set to cut now. And what I did when I was mounting this board, I was making sure it was tight against the cleat and tight against the board, perfectly square. So I pushed it in tight, tightened my clamps, and it should be all set to go. And there's my two boards that I cut. So let me cut the other two boards, and then what I'll be doing, I'll be cutting this into 3 pieces and then putting them together to make a segmented disc. Now there I have 6 boards. I'm going to cut these into thirds to give me a total of 18 wedges, and you can see what they look like from the ends. Okay, I cut those into pieces that are about 4 3/4 inches long, and I put them together. And because of the different lengths on the sides, it's a little bit hard to clamp, so they're off a little bit for clamping. So it may be necessary to glue these together, maybe in sets of 2 first, and then put them together. It seems like it's still a hair off, like that angle should be just a hair a little bit larger. Okay, that previous board I cut, some of my boards were different thicknesses. And 2 things I think happened there is, number one, I forgot to lock my mag jig clamps, so it may have moved a little bit. And maybe the board moved away from the sacrificial fence when I was clamping it. So I'm going to do 2 different things different this time. Number one, I'll make sure my clamps are tightened tightly. And I did take a piece of scrap from the next board I'm working on, and I did some test cuts to try and get the boards exactly the same thickness. So they're within, 4 or 5 thousandths thickness now, so they're pretty accurate now. So I'll be cutting 2 boards. I have some yellow heart and some walnut, so I have alternating segments. I'll make it a little bit nicer looking board. And so I have 4 boards here I'll be cutting. The other thing I'm going to do is, as I clamp it to the sacrificial fence, I'm going to be using some small clamps to make sure it's tight against the sacrificial fence, just to set it up. When I tighten the clamps, it'll be right on. So let me go ahead and try that. Let me move the camera again so you see a little bit clearer. So here's my first board. And I use these clamps to clamp it against the carriage. Make sure it's pushed down against the cleat, tight against the carriage, and I can lock this clamp in. It probably would have been easier to remove the carriage from the Accu-Slice rail and do this clamping on the workbench. After the 2 bar clamps push the board tight against the sacrificial fence, I then tighten the offset cams. I have to push it down against the cleat, and then once it's held in place, I remove the bar clamps. So it's tight against the carriage now on both ends. Remove these clamps. Tight against the cleat. Should be aligned. My mag jigs are clamped tight. So let me go ahead and cut a board here. Okay, I'm using the same technique to clamp the yellow heart board. Because what I'm seeing, even the slightest amount of warp or twist in the board will cause it to pull away from the fence. So, got it clamped nice and tight on both ends. I can remove the clamps. let's go and cut this yellow hardboard. What I forgot to mention at the beginning, I did run both of these boards, or all these boards, through my board sander to get them all exact same thickness and the same width, so they're exactly the same. And after cutting one of the walnut boards and one of the yellow heart boards, this is the pattern I'm looking for. And they seem to be much more consistent as far as the thickness of the boards now. So I got 2 more boards to cut, and then we'll... So now let me go and cut these into boards about, just about 5 inches long, and we'll assemble them to a disc and see what they look like. Okay, here's the net result of making those staves, and they're near perfect. They came out really good. So it's 18 segments. So in conclusion, this is definitely doable to make staves on the Accu-Slice system. It does require a little bit of technique, making sure you get your angle on your bandsaw blade perfectly accurate. And you're making some scrap pieces just to test it out to make sure you get the right angles. That's a good idea. And then once you get your angles all set up, then you can go and start cutting. A couple things is make sure your boards are all exactly the same thickness and the same width, running through your board sander or planer to get them exactly the same thickness. And then when you're clamping the boards, making sure that they're flat against the fence and flat against the cleat on the bottom of the carriage. Longer boards tend to warp, so you got to be careful with those that they don't warp on you. So you may have to screen your wood a little more carefully to make sure it's all nice and straight and flat to get accurate results. But these all came out good. They're all exactly the same thickness, the same width, and the angles are almost perfect. I could always glue this in halves, sand it flush, and then glue the 2 halves together after I sand it square. But I think I'm going to go ahead and glue these as one complete assembly. Just glue all 18 at one time, and we'll see how it comes out. Just put lots of rubber bands on it and try and get it nice and straight on the inside. So that's the next step. Let me go and glue these up. Okay, I'm ready to start gluing these up, and I have some idea here for patterns for the bottom and top, so I need to put it in a layer. But I'm using Type-On 3 glue again. I think I have enough time to get this set up, but let me start gluing it up. And once again, I am putting Type-On 3 glue on both surfaces to make sure I get the thorough coverage of the glue on all the pieces. And then my preferred method of clamping is rubber bands. I prefer rubber bands because they give a nice even pressure around all sides, whereas the metal hose clamps tend to misalign the one segment at the screw section of the hose clamps. And I like to use lots of rubber bands, even doubling up on any of them. But that's about as good as I can get it. So I got pretty round, trying to get it round in the center. I put lots of rubber bands on to get lots of pressure on it, so it's about as good as I can get it. Yeah, I just took the rubber bands off and cut the ends square and sanded them, and this is the result. Looks pretty good. So I think I'll put this in a lathe, try and get it in between some centers, and round it off and maybe square off the ends. I mean, I'd try that the next step. Okay, I mounted it into a chuck here, tighten it a little bit, and I put a rotating center piece in the center, kind of hold it in place. Now I'll just round it off, then I'll reverse it to get the other side smooth. I then squared off the edges on my disc sander to get rid of the stub that was left there. And this is the resulting 18 segmented disc. Again, nice tight joints on the ends, the sides. Came out very nice. So I just glued this set of staves to a base plate. This base plate on my lathe consists of just a solid maple piece, which I'll be cutting off, then an 18 segmented maple piece, then a rotating walnut and maple piece. And I glued this on using my rotating tailstock so I can align it properly to get the segments aligned. Because I want rotating, segments. And I'll do the same thing on the top as soon as this dries. Okay, I'm ready to glue on the opposite end. Again, it consists of this 18 segmented disc and this alternating maple and walnut disc. So the top and bottom will be exactly the same, and I want to alternate the segments. So again, I'm using my rotating tailstock to install this. I'm using the rotating tailstock so I can accurately align the segments so they do alternate from one layer to the next. Okay, let that dry for at least 2 hours. I think I'll make a vase out of this, small vase. I did speed up the actual showing of the lathe turning at 10 times the actual speed just for viewing purposes. And I edit this video quite a bit also, just again to reduce viewing time. No need for you to see me do every step of the turning operation. And I did use excessive sandpapers to sand this down all the way to a 400 grit finish. And here's the resulting shape of my outside small vase. I finished the vase by turning the inside shape to the same contour as the outside, to a wall thickness between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch. I did use extra care in turning the inside of the bowl because I was getting a lot of vibration because of the grain direction on the wood. And I was concerned that the end grain glue joint at the bottom may be a very, very weak joint and it could easily pop off. So I did cut very slowly. And then I did sand the inside, going all the way down to 400 grit sandpaper to get a nice smooth surface. After I cut the vase off the base plate on the lathe, I then sanded the bottom flush on my disc sander and then gave it a couple coats of bush oil to get this nice finish. So this is the finished 18 segmented stave vase that I produced for this video. For this video, I was able to produce a number of 20-degree staves from various woods and at different stave lengths. I was able to produce very accurate angles on the staves, which were very accurate the entire length of the staves. Here are some guidelines for producing the accurate staves as I described in this video. First of all, you want to make sure you clamp the boards tight against the sacrificial fence and also tight against the bottom cleat on the fence. Secondly, you want to run a number of test pieces to determine the accurate bandsaw angles to get perfect joints. And this may be a trial and error. You might have to make several test pieces to get accurate joints and adjust these to, better than 1/10 of a degree accuracy. When using multiple boards for a project, make sure all your boards are the same thickness and width. This can most easily be done by running the boards through a board sander. And finally, when cutting your board, try and cut the board exactly in the center so that the two halves are near identical. Part 2 of this video series will be available shortly, in which I produced some larger stave projects and improved on some of the techniques I used for cutting and gluing the staves together. Once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, as always, please give us a call or drop us an email. And thank you.